The night was quiet in the upper levels of the Starlight Medical Tower. The halls were made of glowing silver glass, clean and smooth. Most staff had already gone, leaving only machines and silence behind. But one man was still working, pushing his mop slowly across the shining floor. His name was Callan, a human janitor. He wore an old uniform and his hands were rough from years of cleaning. But his eyes were kind, and his steps were gentle. He didn't belong in a place like this. The tower was made for the rich, the powerful, the alien elite. Creatures with wings of crystal, skin of fire, and voices like music passed through here every day. But no one looked at Callan. To them, he was invisible, just a worker who cleaned their mess. As Callan moved down the east wing, he heard something. A small, soft sound like someone trying not to cry. He stopped, listening. The sound came again, from around the corner. He quietly followed it, curious and concerned. In the corner of a quiet waiting area, he saw her, a young alien girl with lavender skin and glowing eyes. She sat in a mobility chair, her small hands gripping the arms tightly. Her legs were thin and weak, wrapped in support bands. Her eyes were filled with tears, but when she saw Callan, she quickly looked away. Callan didn't speak at first. He knelt down beside her, not too close. He pulled something from his pocket, a wrapped candy, slightly melted. "It's not much," he said gently, "but it's sweet." The girl looked at the candy, then at Callan's face. She didn't take it, but she didn't run either. Callan placed it on the armrest of her chair and smiled. Then he noticed her mobility device was broken. One of the wheels was bent and it sparked with every move. "Do you want me to fix that?" he asked softly. She didn't reply, but her eyes followed his hands. Taking it as a silent yes, Callan reached into his cleaning pouch. He pulled out a small toolkit, old but reliable. With slow hands, he tightened the loose parts and adjusted the wheel. He didn't rush, didn't speak much, just worked while humming an old Earth song under his breath. Minutes passed, and the wheel stopped sparking. He gave the chair a gentle push. It moved smoothly. The girl's eyes lit up. Just a little. Callan stood and dusted off his knees. "There you go," he said with a soft grin. "All better." The girl finally spoke, her voice like wind through leaves. "Thank you." Callan nodded. "Any time." Then, without another word, he walked away. His mop still waited, and the night was not over. But what Callan didn't know was that someone had been watching. Behind a transparent privacy screen on the upper wall, a tall, graceful alien woman stood still. Her name was Velrana. She was one of the richest and most feared figures in the galaxy. And the girl Callan helped, Zalira, was her daughter. Velrana had seen many things in her life. Wars, betrayals, business empires rise and fall. But tonight, she saw something. Rare, gentle kindness with no reason. She had hired doctors, teachers, therapists for Zalira, but her daughter never smiled for them, never trusted them. And now, a janitor with tired eyes and an old mop had done more in 5 minutes than all her money ever could. Velrana touched the edge of the glass, her lips tight, her eyes wide. This human, this simple man, had no idea what he had just done. But she did, and in her heart something began to stir, something that had been silent for a very long time. She whispered to herself, "Who are you, Callan?" And deep inside, the first thought took root. Maybe. He is exactly what we need. Velrana sat alone in her private observatory, watching the stars move like silver fish across the sky dome. The city below glittered with wealth, power, and secrets. But tonight, all her thoughts circled around one man, a human janitor, a man with no fame, no fortune, no known history. Yet somehow, he had made her daughter smile. Zalira had not smiled since the accident, since her legs were crushed in the landslide on Varnus 4, since the cruel whispers started. Calling her the broken princess, doctors failed, teachers gave up. But this man, Callan, came with a mop and left with her daughter's first spoken words in months. Velrana couldn't ignore it. She ordered her assistant to retrieve every file on the human janitor. His background was plain, almost boring. Callan Rain, age 39, born on Earth, no family, no crimes, no big dreams, worked as a cleaner on multiple stations, always quiet, always helpful, never promoted. But actions mattered more than records, so Velrana launched her own investigation. Not with questions, but with silent tests. The first test was simple. She ordered a maintenance droid to spill oil in a hallway, where no cameras were placed. She watched from her private screen as Callan passed by, paused, and without hesitation began cleaning. He even placed a warning sign to protect others, though no one had asked. The second test was colder. She had a nurse act rude to Callan in front of a crowd. The nurse mocked his dirty uniform, called him earth trash. Velrana watched Callan's eyes harden for a second, but he said nothing cruel back. Instead, he helped an old alien woman nearby who had dropped her coat. His focus stayed on kindness, not ego, not pride. Velrana found herself smiling. She hated tests like this, but she needed to know. Not just for her daughter, but for herself. She had met kings who lied, warriors who betrayed, lovers who vanished. But Callan was something different. Real. Later that week, Zelira grew restless, asking about the mop man over and over, so Velrana made a decision. She sent Callan a private message, an invitation, no details, no reason, just a location. The Garden Hall of Light. Callan stood outside the gate with his shoes polished, hair combed, and confusion all over his face. He had borrowed clothes from another worker, his shirt slightly too big, his shoes slightly too small. When he entered the glowing garden dome, he was stunned. Golden flowers floated in the air, light vines hummed music, and alien nobles laughed softly under crystal trees. He didn't belong there, and he knew it still. He moved slowly, carefully, until a tiny blur shot across the garden. Callan, Zelira cried, racing toward him in her chair. He knelt instantly, smiling as she crashed into his arms, laughing. For a moment, the garden went silent. Every eye turned toward the human in cleaning boots. Some whispered, some stared in shock. But Callan didn't care. He just looked at Zelira, brushing her hair from her eyes. "You look stronger already," he said, and she giggled. "Only because you fixed my wheel." Velrana stepped out from the shadows, dressed in flowing gold silk, her eyes sharp and unreadable. She approached Callan slowly, her footsteps silent. "You came," she said quietly. Callan stood awkwardly, unsure if he should bow, salute, or run. I didn't know it was you who invited me," he said, voice low. Velrana's gaze didn't soften. Not yet. She looked him up and down, seeing the wrinkles on his shirt, the tired lines on his face, the humble honesty in his eyes. "You helped my daughter," she said, without reward, without knowing who she was. "I just saw a kid who needed a hand," he replied simply. That answer made her pause. So many people around her spoke in riddles, in deals, in sweet lies. But Callan spoke in truth, short and clear. "I need someone who won't lie to my daughter," she said at last. "Someone who treats her like a person, not a project." Callan raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering me a job?" Velrana's lips twitched slightly. "No, Mr. Callan, I'm offering you a chance." She turned and gestured to the floating bridge ahead. "Walk with us." And as Zelira wheeled between them, laughing at the lights and asking Callan endless questions, Velrana stayed silent. But in her mind, she whispered, "Let's see what more this human can do." Callan stood at the edge of the floating bridge, watching colored lights dance in the distance. It felt like a dream. Just a few days ago, he was cleaning broken tiles and empty waiting rooms. Now, he was walking beside an alien billionaire and her daughter in a garden full of glowing trees. He didn't know how it happened or why, but somehow, the quiet janitor from Earth had been pulled into something far greater than himself. Velrana walked ahead, her long robe sweeping the soft lights underfoot. Zelira rolled between them, pointing at floating petals and asking questions about Earth. "What's a donut?" she asked suddenly. Callan smiled. "It's round, sweet, and terrible for your health." Zalira laughed, and the sound made Velrana stop walking for a moment, just to listen. Later that night, Velrana invited Callan to stay in a guest wing of her estate. The room was larger than his entire apartment back on Earth. It had soft white walls, a bed that floated above the floor, and a view of twin moons beyond the glass ceiling. Callan stood by the window, not sure if he should sit or leave. He still wore his old boots and his shirt had a patch on the elbow. He didn't belong here, but somehow the girl wanted him nearby, and her mother, Velrana, was watching closely, from the shadows, from the corners, from behind her unreadable eyes. The next day, Callan found himself walking with Zalira in her therapy room. He didn't try to be her doctor or her trainer. He just talked, laughed, and listened. They played with puzzles, watched old Earth cartoons, and built towers from glowing cubes. And all the while the child grew brighter, braver, stronger. Velrana watched everything from the balcony above. At first she told herself it was for safety, but the truth was, she liked watching them together. Her daughter, once silent and distant, was alive again. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. One night, a kitchen worker dropped a tray. Callan knelt down to help, and the alien cook, usually silent, smiled and thanked him. Another time, a palace guard twisted his ankle. Callan helped him sit, wrapped his leg, and said nothing about it. Little by little, others in Velrana's estate began speaking about him. He's just a janitor, some said, but he sees people, others whispered. Not their titles, not their scars, just people. Callan didn't notice the change. He still wore his worn-out boots and fixed broken chairs when no one was looking. But Velrana noticed the servants walked straighter, the halls felt lighter, and even the air seemed less cold. One evening, Velrana called him to her private chamber. The walls were filled with ancient books and glowing maps of the galaxy. She sat behind a table carved from obsidian crystal. "You've done more in 10 days than my doctors did in 10 years, she said. Callan scratched the back of his head. "I didn't mean to do anything special." "Exactly," Velrana replied. "That's why it matters." She stood and walked toward the window, her voice softer now. "My daughter was broken," she said. "Not just her body, her spirit. I tried everything, except what you gave her." "What's that?" Callan asked. Velrana turned to him. Time, patience, and no expectations. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing, just gave her a quiet nod. "I want to offer you something," she continued. "A formal role. Zalira's personal companion and protector." Callan blinked, surprised. "Me? I don't have training for that." "You don't need it," she said. "You already protect her, in ways no weapon ever could." Callan looked down at his hands, still calloused from mopping floors. He never expected any of this. He just wanted to help, to be useful, to matter. "Just a little, I'll accept," he said slowly. "But I want to keep being me." Velrana smiled slightly. "That's exactly why I chose you." That night, as Callan returned to his new room, he passed a hallway mirror. He stared at his reflection, wondering how a janitor from Earth had ended. Up here, he didn't have the answers, but he felt something different now. Not just purpose, he felt seen. And somewhere, in the heart of a royal estate filled with riches and secrets, a simple human man had touched more lives than he ever realized, and it was only the beginning. The grand halls of Velrana's estate were filled with whispers, not the quiet whispers of servants or passing guests, but the sharp, bitter kind, the kind that flew from mouth to mouth like cold wind through stone corridors. "Did you hear? She's keeping the human. A janitor at her side? A joke, it must be. The court won't accept it." Callan had become a name they all spoke now. Not because of his wealth, he had none. Not because of his power, he had even less. But because he was different. He had become something they couldn't understand. To the nobles, Callan was dirt on polished floors. He didn't bow the right way, didn't wear shining robes, didn't speak in elegant words. But to Zalira he was safe, To Velrana, he was real, and to the staff of the palace, he was hope. Still, the court didn't care about kindness. They cared about image, order, control, and a human worker standing beside one of the most powerful alien women. It was chaos in their eyes. One evening, Velrana was summoned to the High House, an ancient chamber carved from the bones of a fallen star beast. 12 other council leaders sat in a circle of flame-lit thrones. They watched her enter, their eyes hard and cold. "You've brought a human into your inner home," said Lord Varys, his voice like grinding stone. Velrana stood tall, her head high. "Yes, I have. You dine with him, walk with him, let your child depend on him," said another noble woman. "Is that a problem?" Velrana asked, her tone calm but sharp. "He is beneath your station," a voice snapped. "And you insult the court by lifting him above his place." Velrana's eyes narrowed. "Above his place?" she repeated. "He lifted my daughter from sorrow, when no one else could." The room went silent. Then Lord Varys leaned forward, his voice lower now. "We are not questioning the child's recovery," he said. "We question your judgment. If you continue to parade this janitor before the galaxy," he warned, "you risk your council seat." Velrana did not blink. Her silence spoke louder than any scream. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice. "Then you will have to risk it," she said, "because I will not hide what saved my family." Back at the estate, Callan didn't know about the council's warning. He was helping Zalira plant a small earth flower in the indoor garden. She laughed as the soil clung to her fingers. "This is messy," she giggled. Callan smiled. "The best things in life usually are." Just then an ambassador entered the garden, one of the court nobles, tall and elegant. He wore robes made of shimmering scales and walked with the pride of his bloodline. He stared at Callan, disgust clear on his face. "What is that doing here?" he said, loud enough for Zalira to hear. Callan stood slowly, placing himself between Zalira and the man. "I'm here because she asked me to be," Callan replied calmly. The ambassador sneered. "Did you clean her floor before you decided to play father?" Zalira's hands clenched, her voice trembling. "He's not just anyone," she said. "He listens to me. He makes me feel normal." The ambassador turned red with anger, but before he could say more, Velrana entered the garden. She had heard everything. Her eyes met the ambassador's cold as steel. "You will not speak to my family that way," she said. "My family," she repeated, her voice firm. The ambassador bowed stiffly and left, but not before casting a hateful glance at Callan. Later that night, Callan stood on the terrace, looking at the stars. Velrana joined him, silent. "At first, I'm causing trouble," Callan said softly. Velrana shook her head. "No," she replied. "You're exposing their weakness." "What weakness?" he asked. She looked at him, eyes thoughtful. "Their fear of something pure." She stepped closer, her voice lower now. "They think strength is power, titles, bloodlines. But you," she paused, "you have none of that, and yet you make them feel small." Callan didn't know how to answer. He had never wanted attention or conflict. He just wanted to help Zalira, to do some good in a lonely world. Velrana looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you ready for what's coming, Callan? Because the court won't stop here." He met her gaze and nodded slowly. "I didn't come here to fight," he said. "But if I have to stand my ground to protect her, I will." And under the twin moons of Velrana's world, a human, Janitor prepared to stand against a galaxy that wanted him gone. Not with weapons, not with titles, but with truth and love, and the quiet strength of someone who refused to walk away. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. A warm breeze moved through the crystal arches of Velrana's estate. The lights dimmed early, and most of the staff had gone to rest. But Callan couldn't sleep. Something in the air felt strange, like a storm waiting to break. He stood by the window of his guest room looking out at the glowing garden below. Zelira's room was across the courtyard, her soft light still on. She had trouble sleeping some nights. Sometimes she had bad dreams, memories. From the landslide, Callan always made sure to stay close just in case. That night his instincts were right. A faint clicking sound echoed through the hallway, followed by a low hum. It wasn't normal, not in this part of the estate. Callan stepped out of his room and saw something that made his blood run cold. Two figures dressed in shadow armor moved. Silently down the hall, their bodies shimmered as they passed through light, nearly invisible. But Callan saw them. He felt them. They were heading towards Zelira's room. Without thinking, he ran. No weapon, no armor, just his body and his will. He slammed open Zelira's door. She sat up with wide eyes. "Callan?" she whispered. "Stay quiet," he said, voice shaking. "Stay behind me." The intruders burst through a second later, blades drawn, eyes hidden behind black visors. "Leave the girl," one of them said. "We only want the human." Callan's heart pounded. "They're here for me," he thought. But there was no time to think, only to act. He grabbed the chair beside the bed and swung it hard. It hit the first intruder in the chest, throwing him back. The second one lunged, slicing the air with a curved blade. Callan dodged, just enough. The blade cut his shoulder, but not deep. Blood soaked his shirt, but he didn't stop. He threw a lamp, then grabbed Zelira's walker and used it like a shield. Zelira screamed, but Callan kept her behind him, blocking every move he could. Alarms finally echoed through the estate. Guards would come, but not fast enough. One of the intruders reached. For Zelira, Callan tackled him, both crashing through a table. "Run!" Callan shouted. Zelira hesitated, but then rolled into the hallway as fast as she could. The intruder beneath Callan growled and punched him hard in the ribs. But Callan held on, fighting like a man with nothing left to lose. Then came the sound of plasma rifles charging. Velrana entered with 5 armed guards, her eyes wild with fury. "Stand down," she shouted, and the room exploded with red light. The intruders tried to escape, but they were trapped. One was shot, the other surrendered. Velrana rushed to Callan, who was still on the floor, blood on his face. He looked up at her and gave a weak smile. "Guess I ruined your chair." Zelira returned moments later, her face pale, her eyes full of tears. She threw herself at Callan, hugging him tightly. "You saved me," she whispered. "You really saved me." Velrana knelt beside them, her hand on Callan's cheek. "I warned you," she said softly. "They wouldn't stop." "I didn't care," he whispered. "I wasn't going to let them take her." Medics arrived, and Callan was taken to the healing wing. He had cracked ribs and a deep cut on his shoulder, but he survived. The next day, the council sent a message to Velrana. They denied any connection to the attack, but she knew better. They were scared now, desperate, because Callan had become more than a symbol. He had become real to the people, to her, to Zelira. That evening, Velrana stood at Callan's bedside. He was awake, bandaged but smiling. "You could have died," she said quietly. "I've almost died before," he replied, "but never for someone who mattered." She looked at him for a long time. Then, with steady hands, she reached into her robe and pulled out a small glowing seal. Her family crest. She placed it in his hand. "This means protection," she said, "and choice." Callan looked at the seal, confused. "You can leave now, and no one will follow," she said. "Or, you can stay, as part of our family, not as a servant, but as someone who belongs." He stared at the seal, then at her. Zelira sat beside him, holding his other hand. Callan's voice was quiet but strong. "I already made my choice," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, something unbreakable was formed. Not by blood or law or power, but by trust, by courage, and by love born in the fire of danger. The attack changed everything, not just for Callan, but for the entire estate. Guards were doubled. Halls were scanned every hour. But the biggest change wasn't the security. It was how they looked at him. No longer was Callan the human with a mop. He was now the man who stood between death and a child. Servants bowed their heads when he passed. Guards saluted. Him. Even the chef left fresh meals at his door without being asked, but Callan didn't care about attention. He still woke early, still fixed broken furniture, still checked Zalira's wheels before breakfast. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt sore, bandaged, and tired, but alive. Velrana invited him to walk beside her through the royal garden one morning. The sky was pink with morning glow, and music played from unseen sources. "You've become quite famous," she said gently. Callan gave a tired laugh. "All for getting stabbed in a hallway." "No," she said, stopping to face him. "For showing the galaxy what true courage looks like." He looked at her, unsure. "Courage isn't always in battles," she continued. "Sometimes it's in staying when you could run." Later that day, Velrana stood before the Grand Council's live broadcast. Alien leaders across the galaxy watched from their own systems. Her image beamed into thousands of cities, her voice calm but firm. She wore her royal crest, but beside her stood Callan, simple uniform, bandaged arm, steady eyes. "I stand here today not to defend my actions," she said, "but to explain my decision. This human, Callan Rain, is no longer a visitor in my house. He is now part of it, chosen not by blood, but by deed." The crowd watching. Across the stars went silent. Reporters blinked in confusion, nobles whispered in anger. But millions of ordinary people watching from their homes cheered quietly. They saw someone like them being seen. After the speech, Callan stepped away from the cameras, breathing hard. Zalira hugged him tightly. "You didn't even tremble," she whispered. "I was trembling on the inside," he joked, and she laughed until her voice cracked. Back in the palace, Velrana handed him a folded cloth. Inside was a new uniform, silver trim, deep midnight blue, with the crest of her house on the chest. "I can't wear this," Callan said, surprised. "You've already earned it," she replied. "You just haven't accepted it yet." He held the cloth for a long moment. It wasn't about fabric or color. It was about belonging. For years he had been invisible, walking through life as if he didn't matter. Now, standing in this glowing hall, with a child who looked up to him and a woman who trusted him, Callan finally felt seen. The next day, Velrana hosted a banquet for foreign leaders. It was a political move, yes, but also personal. She walked into the grand hall with Callan on her right, Zalira on her left. Gasps echoed through the room, nobles dropping their wine glasses, whispers flying like birds. A foreign minister leaned toward her and hissed, "You bring a janitor to a royal table?" Velrana didn't even turn. "I bring a hero," she said. "If you have a problem, you may leave your plate untouched." Throughout the night, Callan remained quiet, but he observed everything. He saw how some smiled kindly while others looked with disgust, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here for Zalira, and for the woman who believed in him. Zalira held his hand under the table when speeches began. "You look different," she whispered. "Like you belong here." Callan smiled. "Maybe I do." By the end of the night, guests began approaching him, not with insults, but with curiosity. One diplomat asked, "How did you win her trust?" Callan answered honestly. "I never tried to win anything," he said. "I just stayed when no one else did." In the quiet after the banquet, Velrana joined him in the garden. "You stood tall tonight," she said. "Not just for me, but for yourself." Callan nodded slowly. "Took me a long time to believe I had the right." "You're not just a janitor anymore," she said gently. "You're family." And as the stars moved slowly above them, Callan finally felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. Years passed, but the memory of that night, the night Callan bled for a child that wasn't his, never faded. It became a story told across stars, in whispers, in news feeds, and in the hearts of those who had once been ignored. The janitor who saved a princess, they called him. But to Callan, that night was never about fame. It was about family. He still woke early, still walked the garden paths with Zalira, who now stood tall on robotic legs designed to match her every movement. Her laughter filled the halls, no longer trapped in fear or pain. She trained with teachers from across the galaxy, but she always returned to Callan for advice. Not because he had all the answers, but because he listened. Velrana watched their bond grow stronger. There were days she said nothing, just watched from balconies, smiling as Zalaira and Callan planted new flowers in the memory grove. One evening, she spoke softly beside the fire. "You changed her future," Callan replied. "She changed mine first." He had stopped wearing his old janitor's boots, but he never let go of his past. In his private room, tucked inside a small drawer, he kept the mop handle, cut short, polished and wrapped with gold threads. Not as a tool now, but as a reminder of where he began. Other royal houses began inviting humans into their estates, some out of curiosity, others out of fear of falling behind, but none could copy what Callan had built, because what he gave wasn't just care, it was heart, and hearts couldn't be replaced by training or titles. At a summit of allied worlds, Callan stood beside Velrana and Zalaira. Reporters flooded the hall, cameras flashing. One asked, "How does it feel to stand here, once a janitor, now a leader?" Callan smiled gently. "I'm still me," he said. "But now I sweep different kinds of messes." Laughter filled the room, but beneath it was respect. He wasn't there because of power. He was there because he chose to stay when others turned away. Later that night, Zalaira entered his room holding a carved crystal. "It's from the people of Solari 3, she said. "They wrote your name into their school walls." Callan looked at the gift, tears warming his eyes. "They don't even know me," he whispered. "They know what you stood for," she said, "and that's enough." Velrana joined them, dressed in her ceremonial robe. She walked slowly to Callan and offered him a sealed document. Inside, written in silver ink, was a single sentence. "House Velrana formally adopts Callan Rain into blood and bond." He stared at the paper, hands shaking slightly. "I'm not royal," he whispered. "No," Velrana said. "But you are ours." That night, under the twin moons, Callan stood at the family altar. He lit the flame beside Zalaira and Velrana. His old title was gone. He was no longer the janitor. He was Callan Velrana, protector, father, and chosen heart of the house. Zalaira placed her hand in his, her eyes glowing with happiness. "Thank you for never leaving," she whispered. "I never planned to," he said, voice full of peace. And in the years that followed, legends grew. Children across systems were told stories of the human who gave everything, not for power but for love. Schools taught his values. Statues were built in quiet places. But Callan never let it change him. He still fixed broken chairs, still smiled at nervous servants, still knelt down to eye level when children cried. Because he knew, titles fade, statues fall, but kindness remains. On his final evening, many years later, Callan sat in the same garden where he once planted earth flowers with Zalaira. She was grown now, a leader in her own right. Velrana sat beside him, her hair touched by silver strands. "You gave us more than you know," she said softly. Callan looked at her, smiling gently. "And you gave me something I never had," he whispered. "A reason to wake up." He closed his eyes as stars passed slowly overhead, no longer a servant, not just a survivor, but a father, a friend, a legend who never asked to be one. And across the galaxy, every time someone reached out to help without expecting anything in return, the story of Callan Rain lived on. A story, not of power or wealth, but of a human who simply stayed and changed the stars forever.